Welcome to part 2 of What is Naruto was adopted by Nora. If you want to read the original story, it is in the description.
Nora's a mommy. Chapter 4. Last time. We gotta show you some. Crow covered both of their mouths with his hands, effectively muting them. Sorry, would love to stay and chat, but me and Ozzy here have a job to do, he told them bluntly before pulling his hands back. He is correct, Ozpin said as he dusted himself off and accepted his cane from Pirha with a nod of thanks. We have to get going, but may I ask what you all are doing up at this hour, and why is Miss Valkyrie not present? She's barricaded in the bathroom, giving a bath to a Faunus kid she found on campus and now wants to adopt, Blake told them bluntly, getting blinks of surprise. He wouldn't happen to be about this tall, blonde, 9 red tails, and love to eat dust, would he? Crow asked while holding his hand at hip height, getting baffled looks from all the teens. And now? Yeah, how'd you guess? Yang asked, being the first one to snap from her surprise, making Crow laugh as he took out a flask and took a long draught. Because it wasn't a guess, I was the one who brought that little brat here, which was a major pain in the ass, by the way. Swear jar. Crow just stuck his tongue out childishly at Ruby as he took another drink, while on the outside he was the perfect picture of calm and collected. Internally Ozpin was palming his face with a sigh. Why couldn't he have a single hunter or huntress that didn't have some odd quirk or unusual personality? Just one. Finished with his mental plea, the headmaster of Beacon Academy walked over to the bathroom door and rapped on it a few times with the top of his cane. Miss Valkyrie, would you please come out here so we can talk? Straining his hearing slightly, he could just make out a soft muffled gasp from the other side, followed by light footsteps as something got closer to the door. Professor Ozpin, Nora's voice called through the door nervously, making the man nod slightly despite her being unable to see it. Yes, it is. Now I just want to talk about the boy. No, I'm not coming out. You aren't taking him. She cut him off, surprising the gray-haired man at the sudden change from nervous to determined, though given her personality he really shouldn't have been. Please open the door, Miss Valkyrie. This is a very serious situation you are getting yourself into. Ozpin tried to reason with the Orangeette, sighing after a minute or so when the only response he got was the sound of the shower turning on. I'll call Glinda, he said while rubbing his forehead and pulling out his scroll. Don't bother, I can handle this, Crow said confidently as he approached the door, taking Crescent Rose from Ruby as he passed, much to her displeasure. Hey, give Crescent Rose back, you jerk, she demanded while pounding her fists uselessly against his back. In a second, brat. Just need to do this. As he was talking, Crow activated the weapon, causing it to unfold into a massive red and black scythe with a curved gray blade, 2 smaller hook blades opposite of the main blade, scope, bolt lever, and cartridge slot in the middle of the handle, and a blade attached to the bottom of the handle. With an almost casual-looking motion, Crow swung the blade twice at the door before deactivating the scythe and tossing it over his shoulder and into the waiting arms of Ruby. After a few seconds passed for a classic dramatic pause, the door fell to the ground with a solid thud, the hinges and lock cut clean through. Peering over the various items used to block the now doorless doorway, Crow opened his mouth to talk only to duck down when he heard a cry of "Bad man," just being missed by the bolt of electricity that flew past where his head was. Unfortunately, this ended up leaving poor Ruby in the line of fire as the charge quickly homed in on the large piece of metal in her arms. The short girl's shriek of surprise was turned into a garbled mess as her hair puffed out into a static afro and her weapon fell to the floor with a clatter, with her following a few seconds later. Yang was at her sister's side in a heartbeat, making sure she was all right while Crow chuckled awkwardly. Right. Kind of forgot to mention. That brat doesn't like me at all. Oh really? What could possibly give you that idea? Blake asked sarcastically while rolling her eyes. Crow didn't have a chance to give one of his usual quippy returns as another blast. This time a tiny fast-moving white cloud shot through a small gap where he was hiding, colliding with his hip. Everything it came in contact with was suddenly flash-frozen, including his flask, which shattered to pieces from the sudden temperature change. Crow stared silently at the spilled alcohol with a blank expression. Hit the deck. Yang screamed as she dragged Ruby's limp form behind Pirha's bed, said Redhead, yelping as she was dragged down along with Blake a few seconds afterwards. Now you're asking for it, you little punk, Crow roared as he bashed through the makeshift blockade with ease. Just as quickly as his anger came, though, it puttered back out and was replaced with fear at the scene before him. A soaked, but still clothed, thankfully, Nora holding little Naruto, who was naked, protectively as he growled adorably at the intruder, all 9 of his tails pointing towards Crow as the tips glowed brightly. "Oh shit," was all he managed to say before absolute chaos broke out. Dozens of multicolored blasts shot from the tail tips, hitting Crow all over and sending him flying right back out of the window he and Ozpin had arrived in with an effeminate scream. Even though he was gone, the blast continued, forcing everyone to duck for cover like Yang had, as everything in the room was frozen, burned, blown up, zapped, turned to stone, collapsed into itself, soaked in water, blown around, or roasted with hot air. The mayhem continued for several minutes, slowly dying down until it was finally safe for the teens and Headmaster to come out of their cover. Long low whistle. Dom. That kid sure had the element of surprise against Crow, ha, Yang punned as she, Blake, and Pirha peeked out from under the remains of the redhead's bed to see the utterly destroyed room that was Team JNPR's dorm. God damn it, Yang, Vice, who was cowering behind John's overturned bed with Ozpin and Ren, and Blake said simultaneously as they palmed their faces. Everyone else was focused on the equally destroyed bathroom, where they could see the unusual Faunus had passed out, his tails dangling limply next to him and somehow only 4 feet long now and minus the colored tips. Nora just stood there awkwardly as she held the naked child. "Ah, I'm ready to talk," she offered weakly. 20 minutes later. "Isn't this a bit excessive?" Nora asked with a dull look as she sat on a couch in Ozpin's office. Her question was towards the straitjacket, rope, and giant chains she was currently being restrained with. Naruto was right next to her, sleeping peacefully as his now half-sized tails had wrapped around every inch of his body minus his face, with bits of one of Nora's shirts peeking out here and there. "No. Nope. I say it isn't enough. Definitely not. Not even close. Not taking any chances here. Sorry, Nora, but it really isn't." These were the responses she got from her team and Team RWBY, who were standing nearby, making her pout slightly. She didn't know if she should be annoyed at that, or proud. Ozpin was sitting at his desk, Glinda standing slightly to the side of him with her usual stern expression replaced with tired aggravation as she rubbed her temple, while Crow was at the far side of the room covered in bruises, burns, and water, both from Naruto's assault and him landing inside of a fountain during his second trip through a window, drinking from his backup flask. "Will you all be quiet and pay attention?" Glinda said snappily. She really just wanted to get this over with and catch some sleep. The students immediately clammed up with frightened faces. "You didn't mess with a cranky Glinda. The last poor sap to do so was in therapy for a week with TWLS, or terrified of witch lady syndrome." Nodding thankfully to the busty blonde professor, Ozpin looked the group over carefully before locking his gaze on Nora. "Now then, Miss Valkyrie, I understand why you reacted as you had. Given recent events that have happened, anybody with even a half-decent conscience would be reluctant to turn young Naruto here over to the authorities. But that does not mean you can just blatantly refuse to report of such a thing altogether. You should consider yourself lucky that we already intended for the boy to stay here for the foreseeable future." Otherwise you would be punished severely for your actions tonight, Glinda said, throwing in her own 2 bits. Nora didn't even flinch though, her eyes holding steady against the headmaster's. What's going on? Ruby asked her teammates quietly as the apparent staring contest dragged on. How should I know? I've been right next to you the whole time, you dolt, Vice Whisper yelled, making the silver-eyed girl squeak in fright and duck behind the mighty yellow fortress known as Yang. Oi! No need to bite her head off, Ice Queen, Yang said while petting her younger sister on the head like she was a puppy. I told you not to call me that. What you gonna do about it? Why, you little creac. Both girls froze as an ominous sound of something straining reached their ears. Turning their heads in sync slowly, their faces paled rapidly as they came upon the terrifying sight of Glinda bending her riding crop nearly in twine, a vein visible bulging on her forehead, the glare from the light reflecting off her glasses eerily, and a purple flame-like aura lazily emanating from her body. Be silent. Yes ma'am, the 2 girls said with meek voices as they tried to make themselves look as small as possible. With the silence returned, everyone turned their attention back to Nora and Ozpin, who finally seemed to finish with their silent conversation. Nodding in apparent satisfaction, Ozpin pushed his glasses back up from the bridge of his nose with a small grin that caused Glinda's eyebrow to twitch. Oh damn it. He's got another Kakamami idea he's about to go through with, she mentally screamed. The last time he had that smirk was when he allowed Ruby to enroll in Beacon early. As Glinda said, we are planning to keep Naruto here for an undetermined amount of time. And before you ask why, I have a question of my own. Have any of you ever heard of the Veil? He asked with a sudden serious tone, all but 3 of the teens blinking in shock at the question. Duh. Kinda hard not to hear about the place we're currently in and right next to, Yang asked back sarcastically while she pointed out the window towards the city of Vale. John and Ruby nodding in agreement. Not Vale, you dolt. The Veil, Vice said with annoyance, putting extra emphasis on the wording. It's been the biggest news around for almost 2 years now. How could you not know about it? Well, I don't know about Noodle Boy over there, but Cookie and Temper here are from Patch if they haven't told you yet, and that place tends to be little behind on the news, Crow said as he somehow popped up behind the 2 sisters, ruffling their hair while laughing off the embarrassed glares he got from his nieces from the nicknames before continuing. What Ozzy and Snow White here are talking about is an odd barrier-like anomaly that was discovered several miles off the west coast of Mistral. A barrier? Ruby asked, her head tilted slightly in confusion. In layman's terms, yes, a barrier, Ozpin confirmed as he gestured to Glinda. Sighing, the blonde professor pulled out her scroll and typed in a few things before placing it onto Ozpin's desk. A hologram popped into existence showing a recording taken from a small boat. Holy crap, dude. Can you believe this shit? I know, man. This is way past weird. 2 different voices yelled off-screen as the image zoomed in on the background. A good distance away from the boat was what looked like a tall silvery wall of water floating in the air and glistening in the sunlight. Roughly half a mile long, this veil, as it was named, was discovered when a team of huntsmen were sent out to find the cause for the sudden increase in aquatic grim in the area. This is what they found, Glinda explained as the 3, seeing this for the first time, stared in shock and awe. Unfortunately, the team sent were just 4th-year students of Haven Academy, so instead of just reporting what they found, the team leader recorded this and posted it online. Be warned, this gets brutal, she finished with a slight pause. Ruby was confused at what she meant but didn't have time to ask as something started to happen. The wall started rippling in an odd way for several seconds before something started coming out of it. Is that a boat? John asked as sure enough, an old-fashioned and slightly crude-looking sailing ship emerged fully. On the ship was an assortment of oddly dressed men and women, the only thing in common being shiny metal headbands that most of them wore with 4 small wiggle lines carved into a square shape. Everyone visible either had weapons such as swords and knives drawn or were holding their hands in weird symbols. Not even 5 seconds after they appeared though, nearly half of them fell to the floor screaming in agony for seemingly no reason. What's happening to them? Yang asked, only to get her answer from the video itself. Tails, ears, horns, and other such animal-like features started bursting out of the screaming people in a gory and bloody spectacle that caused Yang and John to pale while Ruby was fighting down the urge to puke. A fight that she lost instantly when the unaffected passengers started outright murdering the newly turned Faunus without hesitation. What the fuck? What the fuck? Yang and one of the off-screen voices yelled at the same time as they watched massacre continue until every single Faunus and more than a few humans were killed. With all that death and pain happening, it came as no surprise as several serpent-like grims started bursting out of the water in droves and quickly overwhelmed the unprepared survivors, tearing them and the ship itself to bits in only a few minutes. The image flickered out of existence after that as Glinda picked her scroll back up and put it away. After that first encounter, we had scientists study the veil and discovered it is in actuality a stable two-way bridge to another reality. The kingdoms then tried to make peaceful contact with those on the other side. It didn't work, Ozpin said, rubbing his head as it started to ache just thinking about the political debacle. The first big problem we had is that dust becomes inert when brought to the other side, so special equipment and ships had to be made just to traverse there, he explained. Yeah, father was pissed about that. Spent days ranting about how much a wasted opportunity it was, Vice threw in, shuddering as she remembered her father's reaction when he had gotten that report. While Vice was talking, Ozpin took another sip from his mug before continuing. Thankfully, the people on that side speak a language almost identical to our own, so communicating wasn't a problem. What was that the leaders of the other world, which they call the elemental nations, refused to believe us about the matter. Instead they insisted that we had been the ones killing their ninja. Yes, I said ninja, that were being sent through and even declared war against us. Whoa. Technically yes, but it's pretty much been the easiest war in history as every group of troops those ignorant dumbasses send at us end up just like those in that video, Crow said with an uncaring shrug. Ozpin sighed heavily as everyone turned their attention back to him. That is true. Despite being at war, we have yet to actually enter into conflict with the Elementals. They either end up killing themselves or the Grim take care of them. Any survivors we manage to rescue either kill themselves or attack everyone in sight relentlessly. Okay, this is all very informative and all, Nora interjected. But how is this got anything to do with right now? She asked. Instead of answering verbally, Crow walked up to the tied-up girl and pulled a small black book out from the inside of his shirt. Flipping through the pages, he stopped about 2/3 of the way through and showed the orange jet with the others leaning in over her shoulder to see. What they saw was a page full of odd writing that was smudged up from water damage, and a small picture in the top right corner of the page. The picture was of a smiling young boy with pure blonde hair, lightly tanned skin, bright blue eyes, and a familiar pair of whisker-like tattoos on both cheeks. This is why it's relevant, Thunder Rod, Crow said in a lazy drawl. Ruby, Yang, Vice, and John were looking between Naruto and the picture as they were swiftly putting the pieces together while Ren, Pirha, Nora, and Blake were suddenly showing large amount of anger. Why, you may ask? Because they could partially read some of the writing. Ren, Pirha and Nora due to being from Mistral, the most culturally and artistically diverse of the kingdoms, and Blake because her not-so secret favorite book Ninjas of Love was written in a very similar dialect, and they did not like what was written one little bit. T.N. Me, Uzumaki Naruto. Bounty, 100 million Rio alive, 50 million Rio dead. D. Chair, S-Class. PR, Ority, SSCL, SS. Infer, Ion, Property of the age. Den L. F. Lig. C. Nero. The nine-tailed fox demon. No known ter. S. No known fighting style. Property. 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 He's considered property. Nora screamed in outrage as she struggled fiercely against her bindings. Electricity literally jumping off of her in small arcs. Just as angry but knowing there was more to be said, Ren grabbed Nora by the shoulder, ignoring the multitude of small shocks that zapped him, and focused his semblance through her. Everyone but Ozpin showed surprise as Nora not only calmed down, but her entire body, clothes and all, suddenly became pale and dull-looking. Ren kept her like that for about a minute before removing his hand, causing all the color to return to the girl. Waiting a moment to see if there was another outburst from the now quietly seething girl, Ozpin continued. As I'm sure you've figured out by now, Naruto here is from across the veil. That book Crow has was one of the few things that were salvaged from one of the newest attack parties. We aren't sure how he got here, our best guess being that he stowed away on one of the ships as they crossed over and somehow managed to get to shore. That was a lie. They knew exactly how he got here, or at least a good majority of it, but he also knew it would be a bad idea to reveal these details in front of a certain short-tempered blonde, because then he'd have to explain why the mother she was so desperately searching for was currently hunting down anyone that was from the elemental nations to get revenge for the slaughter of her precious tribe. And I'm sure you noticed his rather unusual appetite, Ozpin said, getting nods all around. These things have made the poor child a target for many people, and most of them aren't the kind of people you trust with the well-being of children, which is why I had Crow bring him here, to one of the safest places in the kingdoms. Which brings us to now and one important question. Intertwining his fingers and resting his chin on them, Ozpin once again looked Nora straight in the eye. How would you like to be made the boy's official caretaker? Yes, what? End chapter. Disclaimer, Ozpin, this is without a doubt the stupidest thing you ever done, Glinda told her superior as they watched Team JNPR, with the now unbound Nora carrying a still sleeping Naruto, and Team RWBY pile into the elevator and head down to RWBY's dorm for the night. Is it, Glinda? You know that none of the staff could be spared to watch over him, and even if we could, they'd need to earn the boy's trust. Something Miss Valkyrie seems to have already done, Ozpin said back while raising his mug for another sip. And she also has classes to attend to, or have you forgotten about those? Glinda countered, drawing a sigh from the headmaster, or it could have been from the fact his cup was empty. I am well aware that this isn't perfect solution, Glinda, but it is the best I have to work with. Now it's late, and I know how much you want to go get some sleep, so how about we hear the rest of Crow's report and be done with this night? About time. Was starting to think you two lovebirds had forgotten about me, Crow quipped, drawing an annoyed groan from the tired blonde. All right, then how about you explain how we got into this whole mess in the first place, Crow? Oi, it wasn't my fault he wandered off. I put enough tranquilizer in that dust crate to knock him out for 3 days, Crow said back. His damn primary semblance is much more powerful than I thought. Yes. He said, primary semblance. Somehow, the boy had two semblances. Something that should be impossible as a semblance was the singular manifestation of one's aura and soul based on a key aspect of a person. The fact he had two was a phenomenon that only drew in more attention to the lad, and gave Ozpin a very good idea of what the kid really was based on the information that had been collected about the elemental nations. His semblance's adaptation. Of course you should have seen that sedatives wouldn't work long on him, Glinda scolded, jabbing the man in the chest with her riding crop for emphasis. Crow shoved the blonde professor back with huff as he took a long swig from his flask. 3 days worth. How was I supposed to know it'd only last 2 hours? Crow demanded as he got right in the woman's face. Enough you two. Crow back to the report, Ozpin said in a stern tone, getting the squabbling duo to break apart. What of the situation at the Vale? Crow just sighed as he pulled out his scroll and hooked it up to Ozpin's desk. Mostly the same shit. 3 more attack vessels from the Mist, Stone, and Cloud respectively crossed and were almost immediately sunk. No survivors. Video of the aftermath of said ships played out. Negotiations with said villages is still going horribly, especially Mist since they are practically centimeters from breaking out into civil war. The Leaf has agreed to a ceasefire due to the third being reinstated again, and the Sand has withdrawn but refuses to negotiate. Videos and photos taken high in the air by non-dust-powered aerial drones of the 5 great villages of the elemental nations, and reports played out as he talked. Their names seemed pretty accurate. Mist being shrouded in mist, Stone built into mountains, Cloud sitting high into the sky, Leaf surrounded by trees, and Sand was smack dab in the middle of a desert. Putting his scroll away, Crow sighed as he rubbed his temple. I also had a run-in with Raven on the way here. Ozpin and Glinda stiffened up at that. Good news is she isn't trying to kill the annoying brat. Turns out, she didn't have any intention of killing him this whole time. Ozpin had a feeling he would regret it, but he asked anyway. And the bad news? She intends to, and I'm quoting her here, turn him into the perfect husband to help rebuild the tribe. The sickened horrified looks on the 2 professors' faces would have been laughable if it had been in any other situation. Glinda was the first to recover from her shock as she asked in a disgusted tone, "You don't mean she's seriously planning to?" "I'm not a religious man, but right now I'm praying to every deity I can think of that she meant that she plans to forcefully hook him up with temper. 'Cause if not, then my sister just became the creepiest person I know," Crow said with a shiver. And given the number of sickas he'd met during his career, that was saying a lot. When does she plan to act? And how long till she gets here? Ozpin asked seriously as his hands turned white from how tightly he was gripping his cane. Please, I'd stop drinking for a year if she wasn't already lurking around waiting for her opportunity, Rose said. His eyes flickered to one of the windows where he briefly caught sight of a small black mass zip past seconds after the 2 teams had left. Tree. Bright red eye shimmered lightly through 4 slits of a terrifying grim-like mask, the wearer of said mask hidden by the branches of a tall tree that gave an unobstructed view into the dorm of Team RWBY. The person had a curvy figure that screamed woman, with long spiky black hair that reached her lower back. Wearing a low-cut black dress with red shoulders, red armored gauntlets. She had a red girdle belt around her waist, tall black leggings with red splatter patterns, and what looked like a collection of black feathers hanging from her hip. Hanging from her waist was a thick bulky sheath with a sword handle sticking out the front. This was the ever-elusive mother of Yang, Raven Branwen. Her gaze was focused solely on the orange jet of Team JNPR as she placed the Faunus boy onto Ruby's bed, getting permission from the young team leader. Such a small, weak, and vulnerable-looking one. Aren't you? Raven thought as she watched Nora and Ruby climb up on the highly unstable-looking bunk with the boy and settled in for the night. But looks can be very deceiving. Oh, so very deceiving. Flashback. 1 year ago. Raven stood inside a small boat, her mask off, revealing a rage-filled face almost identical to Yang's with pale skin and deep red eyes. She currently floated just outside of the Vale, waiting in silence as memories of her destroyed tribe played through her mind. It had been 3 months after the Vale's discovery. The tribe had decided to explore what lay beyond themselves. Acting smart, she had sent a small group of some of her best fighters through ahead to scout out the area. She would have used her semblance to see if it was safe. But ever since the Veil had appeared, her ability to see into the future had become distorted and inaccurate. When they'd gotten the all-clear a few hours later, she and the tribe had passed through, only to find themselves caught in an ambush instantly by ninja wearing blank porcelain masks with an odd symbol on the forehead. She had spotted all but one of the members her scouting party floating dead in the water. The sole survivor and the one who had radioed the foe all clear was on the enemy ship. Clearly gone traitor given by the fact he was directing the enemies where to attack. Even caught off guard like that though, Raven had confidence her tribe would have won. Until she made a very bad discovery. Not only did dust not work, which she had prepared for by having her fellow tribesmen and women switch to non-dust weapons and radios, but neither did aura or semblances. Before she even realized what was happening, most of the tribe members had already been killed and the few remaining quickly falling. The only reason she had gotten out of there alive herself was that her ability to turn into a raven had still worked, though she had managed to cut the head off the bastard who had betrayed her. Though she had noted that the moment she'd done so, one of the masked ninjas' heads had fallen off at the same time. Back to the now. She was back here because she had intercepted a report saying that one of the newly deployed spy drones had spotted a ship full of ninjas wearing the exact same masks were headed straight for the Veil. So she would wait for them, and make them pay for every drop of blood tenfold. Seeing the telltale distortion, Raven drew her weapon, an Adachi-like blade that was somehow double the length of its scabbard and currently shining a light blue. Swinging the blade at high speed twice, the ice dust-coated blade created a thick fog just as a large wooden ship pierced through the veil. Turning into her raven form, she stealthily landed upon the ship and silently observed as many of the masked bastards collapsed from pain and started turning into faunus only to be swiftly and mercilessly executed. It actually slightly disturbed her of all people how casually and methodically these men had just killed their own. If it wasn't for the fact she could see the blood staining the deck, she would be convinced they were simply disguised Atlassian robot soldiers. Moving on from this, she was just about to descend upon them when she and the ninja tensed when loud screaming suddenly burst out from the middle of the deck. Whatever was causing it had to be important, since every one of the masked men rushed towards the source with her following. What she saw upon arriving though, confused the transformed woman greatly. The screaming was coming from a small blonde child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with blue eyes and whisker-like marks across his cheeks that was locked inside a large cage with several dozen slips of paper with more odd writing plastered all over it. The cause of his screaming came apparent as an explosion of blood and skin shot from his backside, revealing 9 blood-soaked tails that flung around erratically. Get Danzo-sama. Tell him the weapon is attempting to escape and the seals aren't working. One of the masked ninja yelled as he and several others kept slapping more of those papers onto the cage. Don't bother, I'm already here. A cold, even voice said as an elderly man exited the main cabin. He was wearing a long white robe with red highlights and an odd hat with a similar color scheme. More than half of his face was covered in bandages that he was slowly removing as he approached the caged boy. Peeling back the last wrap, he opened his once covered eyelid to reveal a charcoal black eye that he proceeded to stare at the child that looked back at him pitifully as he whimpered in pain. Sir, why are you not activating the Sharingan? The same masked ninja from before asked when nothing seemed to happen after a minute or so. What do you mean activate? It should be active, Danzo said in confused frustration as he backed away. Tired of just watching, and seeing the apparent leader of these men, Raven dove down at the man, changing back to her human form as she swiftly redrew her blade. She was surprised slightly when the elderly man was able to react swiftly enough to turn around and draw up a kunai to block her sword, but quickly switched to satisfaction as her sword cleaved straight through both the smaller blade and the man with ease. Danzo-sama, the men yelled as they watched their leader flop to the ground, split from left shoulder to right hip. Not wasting a second, a now masked Raven dashed between the men, not giving them any time to collect themselves. In less than a minute, every masked ninja above deck was laying on the ground in pieces. About to move on to the lower decks, Raven paused when she felt a small hand grab onto her ankle. Please, help. The boy was barely able to rasp out between whimpers, though not entirely from his hind end if the red glow coming from his stomach was anything to go by, as he stared straight into her partially hidden eyes. Normally, Raven would have ignored such a plea, due to her belief that the strong survive and the weak die, but she found herself mildly impressed. Most full-grown men would have either died, passed out, or be screaming their heads off from the pain of such an injury, and yet this kid was only barely whimpering. Deciding to give him one and only one chance, she sliced the front of the cage apart using a burn dust blade before walking off. "Thank you," she barely heard him say, but didn't acknowledge that she did as she marched down into the lower deck, killing everyone she came across. When she reappeared on the higher deck, she was greeted with the sight of 24 or so masked ninja with their hands already in motion. "Katen, Gakakayu no Jutsu," they yelled in unison as Raven braced herself for the coming attack, only to show mild surprise when nothing happened at all. "So their abilities don't work on this side just like mine don't on theirs," Raven quickly deduced with a smirk as she prepared to engage in another bout. RRAAHH. Both parties froze as the devastating roar shook the ship and a huge amount of pressure fell over them. Raven actually found herself breathing heavily as a feeling of dread and danger washed over her. Slowly turning her head towards the source, Raven had a moment in her life where she would truthfully admit she was completely flabbergasted at what she saw. The young boy she had released earlier was currently standing on all fours, a snarl set on his lips revealing elongated fangs. His whisker-like markings were thicker and more prominent, a deep crimson glow shining brightly from his stomach, his new tail standing at end behind him, and his eyes had turned a deep glowing scarlet with slit-like pupils that were just barely seeable past his eyes' bright glow. This wasn't what had her speechless. That was thanks to the 10-foot-tall, dark orangish-red transparent construct of a slightly blobby-looking fox with 9 tails currently tearing apart everything in sight the boy was situated inside of. Raven was jogged from her stupor as the ship shook again, this time from whatever the hell that thing was, tearing a chunk off the side of the boat and using it to squish several ninjas into paste. Taking this as her key to leave, Raven turned into her raven form and took off into the air and watched the carnage from a safe distance. Whatever had happened to that boy, it made him entirely ruthless as he literally tore that ship apart with minimal effort, killing every single living thing on board. Just as the ship was most of the way sunk though, the construct froze up as the boy started clutching at his stomach in sudden discomfort. Watching in silence, she released a caw of surprise when glowing golden chains phased out of his torso and wrapped themselves around him, construct and all. The Aura Fox struggled desperately to escape its bindings as it shrank at a rapid pace as the chains constricted it, before it howled in dismay as it dispersed into particles of red aura. The chains continued to constrict around the flailing child, tightening more and more until they seemed to be absorbed into the boy's skin. After that, the boy instantly stopped struggling and collapsed into a limp pile. The glow from his stomach finally stopped and red highlights suddenly formed on the ends of his hair. Raven was pondering if she should check to see if he was still alive when the ship finally fell apart and sank, with the boys. End flashback. She had spent the several hours looking for him after that only to come up with nothing. She'd assumed he'd been eaten by some form of aquatic grim and left. Then a few months later, she heard of a supposed Grim-bringer child with an alarmingly similar description wandering around from village to village. Remembering the sheer amount of power that child had at his fingertips, Raven could think of no other better suited to help bring about the rebuilding of her tribe. Unfortunately, lacking the usual resources she was used to, it took her nearly 6 months to track the brat down, and by then Crow, Salem, and Ironwood were all after him as well for a plethora of reasons. Ironwood wasn't much of an issue as he simply had a capture on site order, and Naruto had very rarely gone near any place the general's soldiers were. Salem and her little posse were also irritating. But Naruto was luckily not too high of a priority to the witch, so they weren't that much of an issue. Crow was the biggest annoyance. Until recently he'd been convinced she wanted to kill the boy and had spent a good deal of time diverting her away from him while not letting her explain until recently, though, given his reaction, she wasn't sure if that was much of an improvement. But none of that matters now. I will get what I want in the end. Because only the strong survive, Raven thought as she finally broke her gaze away and turned away, vanishing into a black and red portal she had formed with a slash of her blade.